Good evening. Welcome to a very cool room in every sense of the word. I'm, of course, delighted to be here, particularly to, in the end, introduce a pair of unbelievably clever and nice architects, good architects. And also to come here to Kingston. I realise that I'm very often accused of being London-centric. I realise I'm actually North London-centric. And sort of getting here was as elaborate as getting to Geneva or somewhere, but nonetheless, it's great when you get here. And I congratulate you, because I think, though they are very, very good architects indeed, I think also just a little 2-minute we had before, the clients, you, the body of Kingston and your professoriate, are obviously really, really good clients, and they enjoyed doing this building, and it shows. And I will say a little bit more about the architects later, but I'm here also to introduce the whole evening, and I think it's interesting that we will start talking about the way in which the award was given. I've sat on either end of RIBA awards, sometimes luckily and sometimes unluckily, and also sometimes pontificationally, sometimes not. And the RIBA is a much, we all enjoy swearing about the RIBA, but they're a funny organisation, and they have their good side, which is when they give awards and sort of do nice things. And this is the product of the Stirling Prize, which is administered by the RIBA, of course. And it's special because I think these architects this evening really deserved it, which I don't always think. What else have I got to say? At this point, I'm to introduce two people from your university.
Okay, I'm hoping this, that sounds better. So thank you very much, and welcome to Kingston University and to this fabulous building, which is the Townhouse. Let me get the clicker, thank you. So a little bit about Kingston. We have 17,000 students, pretty much 2,000 members of staff, and because we're here for a RIBA event, I'm going to give you some building facts. We have 2,400 bedrooms and 120,000 square metres gross internal area of our non-residential estate, just to give you a flavour of the size of us. We're split across 4 campuses, and we have 4 faculties. And we teach everything from fashion to cybersecurity to business to law to dance, a range, and healthcare, a range of subjects. So we have a very diverse portfolio and a very diverse student body, which we're immensely proud of. So when was Kingston started? 1899, remember that date? Kingston Technical Institute. This is a very important part of our heritage, and I'll come back to that in a moment when we look to our future and the direction of the university. 1970, Kingston University became the Technical Institute was the Polytechnic, and in 1992 we became Kingston University, so we're what's known as one of the post-92s. In 2012, 9,000 fees were introduced, and they've pretty much stayed there, and then in 2020, one of the most amazing, important milestones, the Townhouse, this building was opened. This building is so important to the university, and it really symbolises the ambition that we have. The quote that the panel you've just heard really sums up the building, but we feel this is the physical embodiment of the progressive educational ethos of the university. And it's so important to us, we've actually named our strategy for the next few years after the Townhouse, so it's known as the Townhouse Strategy. What do you know about Kingston? It's not as far as Geneva to get to, but some fascinating facts for you. It's the coronation site of as many as 7 Saxon kings. We have London's oldest bridge, the Clatton Bridge. Just across the river is Hampton Court Palace. If you go up to the 5th floor of this building and you look out, you can see Hampton Court Palace from the top floor, and it really is a truly amazing view. Does anybody know whose images these are? Yeah, Edward Muybridge, the father of modern cinema, and he was born in Kingston. And we are talking to the borough about bringing the Muybridge archive to this building early next year. So come back and see it. We have a really important role in aviation history with some of the most important aircrafts manufactured here, and we continue that link with our aircraft engineering. So if we go back to that heritage, 1899 and Kingston Technical Institute, this was all about, I'm going to steal your phrase, but the learning through doing, and really making sure that our education was vocational and fit for the times. And if we look at the strategy that we're going forward with, the townhouse strategy, again, it's really about making sure that we have got, we're reflective of our history, and we're providing students with the skills they need for the future. And it's a rapidly changing workplace in which they're going to be employed. So it's not dissimilar to the original idea back in 1899 of the Technical Institute, but we have reflected back on our heritage to look to our strategy going forwards. John.
Thank you, Caroline. So you'll have gathered from what Caroline has said there that from our perspective at Kingston, exploring an idea through experimentation is something that really is part of our DNA. So the idea of procuring a building through a design competition wasn't in any way a threat or a worry to us. So back in 2013, believe it or not, we ran the design competition for this building in the second half of 2013. And we appointed Grafton in January 2014. There are some dates up there for various things that happened, including visits to the 5 shortlisted practices. But one thing that we did here, which was really quite unusual and has had a really significant impact on the final result of the design of the building, we kept on the jury that selected Grafton to deliver the building, and we kept them on as an adjudication committee, we call them. We like to give committees interesting names at universities, but they had a single sentence term of reference, which was to ensure that the design integrity of the winning design didn't get lost as we went through the detailed design of the building, and that actually turned out to be something really, really significant. In terms of what we had here before Townhouse, this is what was here before Townhouse. This was a temporary building. It was built in 1986 and it was demolished in 2016, so it wasn't that temporary. This was what you saw when you arrived to Kingston University. You walked through 120 car space car park to go in the main entrance of the building, and the site was identified in the local authorities area action plan as warranting a landmark building. That was the term that they used. They wanted a landmark building that would be a key gateway to the town. And this is what we got. It was built by Wilmot Dixon Construction. Ian Edwards from Wilmot Dixon is sitting up there, and we had a very positive relationship with our contractor. It opened in 2020 and it closed in March 2020. It opened in January, closed in March, and we were absolutely devastated when it closed, but it reopened again in July, and it's been open since. And this building is open 24/7 for a lot of the year because it accommodates the main library for this campus. It won the Stirling Prize last year. People will be aware of that. The Stirling Prize is actually there. It's the pillar at the back. If anybody wants to see and lift the Stirling Prize and see what it's like, feel free to come up and do it at the end of the talk. And in front of it is the Mies van der Rohe Award for Contemporary Architecture. It's a major award, a major European award, and this building won that award this year. Only the third time that a UK building has won that award, the first time that a university building has won the award, and the last time that a UK building can be nominated for the awards, of course, because of Brexit. So to just really quickly talk about a couple of things, I know you're going to hear from Grafton, you're going to hear a lot about the design. I just wanted to show you a couple of things in the 2013 submission that really sold the idea to us and made us feel that this was the building for us. This drawing was actually part of that submission back in 2013. We were particularly taken by the 200-metre linear park that you can see there instead of the 120-space car park that I referred to. Everybody knows this, you always get something when you employ an architect that you didn't ask for. We didn't actually ask for a colonnade, but Grafton came up with the idea of the colonnade, which is such an important part of this building and the way that it works. Shelley describes it as a porous membrane between the university and the town. And the last thing I would mention is the way, you don't really appreciate this from looking at the building from below, but the building is designed in sections, so there are interlocking volumes of space that fall towards Grove Crescent from their height onto Penryn Road. Very important from our neighbour's point of view, but also really important from the way you experience the building when you visit it. A good building, of course, as everybody knows, needs a really good brief. We spent 4 months on the brief. Fiona Duggan is sitting up there. She helped us with the brief. The brief, most importantly, was academically led. Clarissa Wilkes, I'll ask Clarissa to stand up because she's going to join us for the Q&A afterwards, but Clarissa was our Dean of Learning and Teaching at the time that the brief was put together, and Clarissa led that. Also involved was Jason Piper. Jason was the head of the School of Dance. Jason, if you want to just stand up there for a second so people can see you. You were acting head of the School of Performing Arts and the head of dance at the time. Saffron Smith, who's sitting next to Jason, was also a student in our old dance studios, so she can give you a really interesting perspective of what this building is like, because she also now works here as a choreographer and a teacher. And Elizabeth Malone, I think, has arrived. There's Elizabeth, yeah. Elizabeth was the co-director of Library and Learning Services, so she really was a very important client for the building. They were all heavily involved with the construction of the brief. I'll whiz through the remaining slides. So as part of the design process, we visited all of the architectural practices during the course of the competition to see how they were getting on. And these are some of the really stimulating images and ideas that we saw when we climbed to the 4th floor above Weir's Jewellers on Grafton Street. It was post global financial crash, which people remember back in 2008. So Grafton had retrenched back to the building that they were initially founded in. So that's where we went and met them. And we saw some of the images that you see in front of you here, as well as some models that they were working on at that time to explore the idea of the colonnade and how it might work. I mentioned the fact that the building is designed in section. I really like these sketches because they illustrate that very, very clearly, that this is a building that you can't really appreciate from drawings. You have to come and experience the way the volumes interlock. I've got a couple of slides to show you the competition boards that Grafton submitted as part of this competition. These are 2 of the boards that they submitted. There were 4 in total. And the reason that I show them to you is just to really give you an idea of how close the final realised building was to the ideas that were expressed in the competition. And I think the use of the adjudication committee was a very important part of that. The image on the bottom right there, if you just look at that one for a second, and then this is the image of the finished building. On the left-hand side, we have a CGI of the atrium, which was part of the submission for the competition. On the right-hand side, you can see what we've ended up with. That's a photograph. On the top is the elevation that formed part of the submission, and beneath it is the final realised elevation. There's a couple of images of this space. I'm just showing them to you so you can see how the design of it developed. We're all sitting in it. We can see what it's like. But these are really, really interesting images. There was a big conversation at the adjudication committee about the design of this space and the way it should be turned, for example. That was one of the big positives that came out of that group. We got some images here which you don't really need because you're sitting in the space and you can look around and see it for yourselves. So that's it. I'm just going to mention the landscaping. These images were taken last summer, so there's been another growing season since then. This idea of the landscaping growing up through the colonnade, I think, is really, really clear from these images. So I will ask if we could run the video now. There's a very short video which shows how the shows the building being built. If anybody doesn't like flashing images, I would suggest you look away now. So I think if I double click, it should work. Let's see, there we go. Excellent.
Thank you. The clients justifiably proud of their university, justifiably proud of the cooperation with these architects. And I want to talk about the architects very briefly and probably come in on it from an odd angle, which is to refer to this building as part of an architectural culture. I personally think that the British architectural scene at this moment is in a rather feeble state. But thank goodness there are some architects from elsewhere who come and give it a kick in the bum from time to time. And London architecture has had 2 kicks in the bum from these same ladies. That's terrific. And thinking about architectural culture, I'm remembering Kingston. When I was a student at the AA, we were very aware of Kingston. It was a sort of place a little bit left field, but it produced some really rather unusually good architects. Sort of mystery, bit of a mystery place, and I hope that it's still about to produce some really interesting architects. But then that leads me to this question of where is the core of a vibrant architecture culture, and I have to make a point here that Dublin, which is a relatively small city, has in the last 2 or 3 or 4 decades been punching way above its weight. All the interesting architects there seem to have had something to do with UCD, University College Dublin, and those who read Sally Rooney will know that this is a not uninteresting place. But there are, of course, the couple who really first we used to hear about, Toomey and O'Donnell. And I don't know whether Yvonne and Shelley are actually their progeny. I'm not quite sure about the exact dates there, but certainly they're part of the DNA. And then in more recent times, we've had people like the Hennigan-Peng couple who've also made inroads into London and elsewhere. And then there's some sort of rather curiously interesting people, like a certain Mr. De Peur, which always intrigued. I know there are more out there, not just those 3 or 4 of them. And really, the ones that have come up on the inside or outside have been Yvonne, Farrell, and Shelley McNamara, who named their office after the street. They're all these strangely named architects' offices now, but I think to name it after a street is very nice and straightforward. I remember meeting Shelley years ago, and she was being very, very unnecessarily humble. She said, "You may not have heard of me, but I'm an architect in Ireland." Well, watch that space. I then had a very enjoyable 2 days with them on a jury some years ago in a building that they had done themselves, which is a building for the Boccioni University in Milan. That is powerful stuff. My God. That suddenly I said, my God, these two not so humble Irish ladies, they can beat the boys at their own game. They can make no messing around spaces. And that's the interesting thing I was mentioned just now about the sections, because the sections lead to really powerful, memorable spaces. All the buildings that I've seen illustrated, and the 3 buildings I've been in of theirs, all have this very particular sense of space, which sort of surface architects, wobbly architects can't necessarily do. There's another building which I would love to see, which I suspect is the one that appeals to be the most, in Lima, Peru. And in Lima, they seem to have gone even almost, dare I say, fruity. And of course, there's the rival London building at the LSE, which we were in the other night. And I think there's the Telecom Paris building, which also, from photograph, appeals to me. And they've done many buildings, but I think these 3 or 4 clearly have power and conviction. And I say again, they beat the guys at their own game. And thank God they're coming into London and doing some of their powerful stuff, because we need it. They're also a bit of a laugh after a couple of drinks, by the way. Thank you.
I'd just like to start by saying that celebrating a building involves so many people, and some have been listed this evening by Sean and by Anne-Lee and by Carolyn, and so Peter Cook has mentioned people as well, and Clarissa and Jason and Saffron and Elizabeth and Fiona Duggan might be here, all those people. But the legacy of a building, to begin from the first moment that a need is established to the time that the opening of a door, is an amazing feat of human collective belief. And when you stand in a building, you realize that it contains all the blood, sweat and tears of all the people involved, who shall be nameless, from the people who began the need, stating the need, down to the people who thought about the acoustics and thought about the floor and thought about making it. So especially when we look around the world and see destruction, and you realize that buildings actually hold culture. So we're standing, there's also seemingly, I don't speak Vietnamese, but seemingly in Vietnamese, a womb is described as the palace of the infant. And what's really interesting about that is that maybe as soon as we're born, that the skin of human beings is architecture. So that to make architecture is an incredibly important human endeavor. And we are privileged to be architects. And we're privileged to, if you like, serve a community. I'd just like to begin tonight by saying in 1996, that the annual RIBA Prize was named after James Stirling, who unfortunately had died at the very young age of 66 in 1992. And I'd just like to quote 2 things before we begin our kind of formal presentation, is that in 2013, the RIBA asked us to speak at the presentation of the gold medal for Peter Zumthor, which was very interesting and very important. And when we spoke that evening, we said that architecture needs warriors. Architecture has to be made. Otherwise, how do we keep going? We need proof. We need proof that architecture exists. We need to spend time in spaces that nourish the soul. Writings contribute. Exhibitions explain. Films animate life. But in the end, architecture is architecture, a cultural vessel that we can hand on to others. Proof that it speaks its own spatial language. It's not exclusive, it's shared. It's understood physically, intellectually, and sensually. I would say that James Stirling somehow speaks that language. It's not a secret language. It's difficult to learn and it's difficult to speak. I'd just like to finish this particular section by quoting from the wonderful architect Johanna Palasma in his Eyes of the Skin, Architecture of the Senses. And he says, being able to remember a space and a place require, above all, that the memory is stored in the body. In this way, we transfer all the cities and villages that we've ever visited and all the places that we have recognized into memories that we carry in our bodies. And I'd like to talk about a number of buildings I remember standing in because James Stirling had gone to the trouble to make them. When we were young architects in the 70s, it was fantastic to get in a green deux chevaux and drive up from London and go to the engineering building in Leicester, to go to the library in Cambridge, to go to the Florey building in Oxford. And I remember distinctly, I remember what I ate the day I sat in the Neue Stadtgalerie in Stuttgart. I remember I had a gorgeous salad with basil in a building that Stirling had made. So we are very honored to have received the Stirling Prize from the Institute here, and we don't take it lightly. So I'd like to remember James Stirling here this evening. Okay, beginning. It's nice to have his spirit around. Okay, so we begin. I press next. As was said earlier on, what was really important for us, and that going back to that thing of place, that as architects we have a responsibility on this fragile planet to make places that anchor where we are. I remember being in this room, it was a winter's day, and the sun from the south there actually hit not just that surface, not just the railings, not just the glass, but the blocks on the other side. So every building is like a sundial, that we become aware of how fragile and beautiful a place we live in. And as was described, it's incredible that your major river, the Thames, is over there, and that Hampton Court is close by. And as Sean was saying, on the right-hand side, if I can point, is there a pointer in this one? No. Does this have a pointer? No. Okay, if you can imagine over here in this drawing, you see the gold piece describes the building. And there was a 200-meter space from the end of what is owned by the university to the evergreen oaks that are at the other end here. And I think you had 100 and something, Sean, you had the number of cars, 120 cars that had pride of place when engineers were ruling the roost, but we've changed that now. So those cars were somehow whisked away, and between landscape and the trees and the building and the colonnade, we feel that what the university has given to Kingston is that you have given them a new linear park. So when people are waiting at the bus stop, that they can have a cup of coffee. So that the gift to Kingston of this linear park is something that should not be underestimated. The changing seasons and also the existing trees that are there. So that I'm not a great fan really of evergreen oaks, but what is amazing is that they are evergreen and that they hold the place. And when we were here recently, it's really interesting, there's a little small retaining wall just before those trees, and a whole series of little 4-year-olds with those high-vis jackets were waiting for the bus, and that little retaining wall has become a place where their teachers keep them under lock and key until the bus arrives. So a retaining wall can become something else. So moving on, for us then, choosing materials for this building across the road for the County Hall for Surrey was really an inspiration, this beautiful stone that we wanted to replicate, caught on the gorgeous light of the setting sun. And this extraordinary, I suppose Sean was showing those kind of secret images of all the ideas pasted up on the wall. There's also things that go back very deep in history. This map is an incredible map from the 9th century, which is called the St. Gallen kind of monastery. But what is amazing about this plan is that it's also about a world where everything is overlapping. You've got churches and things growing. You've got gardens and breweries. So this is a kind of at one level, an ideal world where everything interlocks and interconnects. And if I can say that, I think it's probably true to say that when a university comes and says they want a library and dance together, we think they're a bit crazy, because acoustically they're at the very end of the spectrum. But there was also the chance of this kind of overlap of strangeness. And that's what education is, that you put together the most ridiculously extreme things together and weave a world. So that was our project. And this, Sean has already described this drawing, but this is really a sketch describing about weaving and interconnecting. And Sir Peter Cook has referred to the issue of section, or if you like, what architecture does. We've been accused of saying that, you know, the plan is the kind of ordinary and the section is the spatial kind of complexity. And that's what architecture is about, is how do you put things together in a new way. So this is about a section which is about leapfrog. So how do you have library and dance interlocked? And so this drawing is really describing the stone building on the other side, giving a certain kind of idea of section, and also the busyness of the road. We were very aware that the traffic is really quite busy along there, but we needed to tame it and civilize it in a certain way. And the kind of birth, as Sean has also quoted Shelley, about the kind of porous nature and the scale of a colonnade, a layer which is both inviting and separating and defining. So this here is also that it isn't just a colonnade where the colonnade is a story, that the colonnade itself could shift and rise and make if you see it here, and look at the levels. You have a low level, you have a high level, a low, double height, triple height, so that the colonnade is also a layer that lifts itself up and has balconies. And I think that it's something, I mean, we have always been involved in teaching, and one of the things that I think, which will come up in another slide, is that when we take the practicalities of architecture, which is that you have to make it safe and you have to make fire escapes so that people can exit, that when you civilize the fire escapes, they can become something else. So in fact, this layer on the outside, which will be described in a minute, is also a layer of safety and movement. And when we were beginning the project, obviously as architects, you're looking at samples, like we said about Stirling and other architects. You're looking for real samples of buildings that are inspirational. And one of the greatest architects, so we have a dear friend back from Australia here, I've never seen the Sydney Opera House, but Jorn Utzon is an incredible architect. And this very modest but absolutely fantastic project is a showroom, a furniture showroom in Copenhagen. And he got his inspiration by these gorgeous copse of trees, so the repetitive system of trees and the light and structure repeated. So for us, this was the beginning of how do we make a place that has a three-dimensional weave that allows us to make a new university building. And these drawings we'd like to share with you. I mean, we're here with Ger Carty and Matt McCullough and Joanne Lyons from our team. And just to say that the thing that really we're always struck by is the commitment of everybody on the team to think about the acoustics, to think about the surfaces. This is really a series of drawings describing the care with which precast concrete can be put together in the 21st century with hopefully the same kind of care as people would have done in previous centuries. That you tame the beast, if you like, that you civilize the industrialization of elements, and that you think of all the junctions. So these series of drawings made by Ger, I think, Ger, these are your drawings, which are really about the thoughtfulness, about the floor structure, how that comes to the beams, how they're tamed and joined in the same way as a timber construction can be in other times. So here also are this is a separating drawing where you see the colonnade wrapping around the building. So on this side here you have a service lift, you have a movement, so we're being wrapped by this colonnade. So the top drawing is really separating out the fire escapes, the terraces, and seeing it as a kind of a cloak on the outside to allow the building. And below it, this amazing drawing, or this model of the Fermony building by the church by Le Corbusier. And what's amazing about that for us is how you think about how people gather. Like, we're standing here with you as a group of people in a space, and how do we make a space that's both open to to dance, how it's open to education. And this is really describing, and I speak away from this, really describing how you make surfaces relate to one another. The next image over here is really describing the section. And Sean talked about the development through the competition. Initially, I think it's true to say that in the plan, we had this facing in another direction to the interior. And the whole discussion through the fantastic decision to keep the judges on board right through the design and development process meant that issues about how you had either a black box or an open space, how do you have an open courtyard, that was further developed through the design. And this originally had its back to the street, to the city. But through dialogue, this was switched around, and when this opens up, when you were standing and arriving this evening, you came in through this here. So during the day, when this open ruin, if you like, is left with the doors open, you connect back to the city of Kingston. And this image is something that we relate to, this kind of ancient Greek bouleuterion, which were places where people met and discussed democracy in its early and fragile days. And what we loved about this was the places where they met between the kind of cracks in the rocks. And this was inspirational to Auguste Perret, making the beautiful space in Paris, the name of which I've forgotten, the Salle Cortot, this beautiful music vessel, inspirational to him because he was talking and wanted to deal with intimacy. And just in terms of the plan, this is this bouleuterion to the same scale as the space that you're sitting in. And these black and white drawings are really describing the plans of the various levels, which mean nothing, I suppose, unless you're looking at the section. So here you see a drawing where we're trying to describe the movement between the various rooms of the spaces of the building.
I'd just like to thank Peter for his introduction and his description, parts of his description. I'm not sure about our effects in London because so many architects here that we respect. But what was very interesting when you were speaking about the different kinds of buildings that we've done that are quite muscular and maybe massive and celebrate surface and weight. And then we were faced with the Kingston brief, which somehow did not allow us to take this path because the brief was so challenging in the sense that it was extremely progressive. It was about making big spans, open spaces, adaptable spaces, spaces for interaction between very different kinds of uses. And we found that we actually had to, I think it's for the first time, we consciously stood back from expression in an expressive way. We decided we needed to make a framework within which the life from the words of this brief that was coming to us, that it needed a more open, let's say, structure within which life could happen. And that sounds awfully simplistic, but it was very important. And in a way, we subsequently were curating the Venice Biennale, and one of the descriptions that Raphael Maneo had for the free space theme which we offered was, he says, when the perception of free space appears when a building's condition as an artifact gives way and space is left as a sensorial expression of freedom. And in a way, that's a very good description of the process that we went through in addressing what we felt was the vision of this project. And I remember Jerry O'Brien is in the audience here from AKT2, and one of the requests in the brief was to make the biggest possible spans in order to allow this kind of adaptability. And we had conversations about car park construction, which sounds very banal, let's say. But there was something interesting about that. How could we make the biggest span in a way that's not really expensive? And that's where this idea of making what you might call a neutral framework, the kind of good old-fashioned concrete frame building, which we've seen many of, and there's nothing original about this, you could say. But what we did find amazing was working with this. We tried to make a plan which described the three-dimensional modulation of light and shade and volume, which would make a 50-meter square deep plan feel like it was dynamic and was changing and was interactive, and that it was one place, that it's not a series of places, that it's not two things, dance and library, that it's one thing, and that we would bring things together. And one of the reasons why we use St. Gallen, the monastic plan, is because there are animals and monks and the sacred and the profane and all of those things in one place, in one plan. And we're not saying they're sacred and profane here, but there is a fantastic mix that we found very liberating. So this was the thing of the maximum span. Here we have 15 meters by 6.6, and it changes and adjusts somewhat. So the framework is neutral. But then the way of modulating that and occupying it becomes the architecture, literally the light and the acoustics. And one of the projects which has affected us for many years and is Florian Bagel and Philip Christou's Half Moon Theatre, the idea of making a theatre as a piece of city. And one of my favourite buildings in Dublin, built by contemporary architects, is by de Blackham and Marr, where they made a Beckett Theatre in the middle of Trinity College, which was hugely affected by this project as well. And what we loved about this was this idea of making space within, which was originally a lecture theatre, but that it would be what we call a democratic space, a piece of city. And it's designed to feel like an outdoor space with using the same materials as we've used on the colonnade and on the exterior. And there was a lot of discussion with the client. And I have to say this client body is exceptional. We had the most wonderful discussions about education, the nature of education, the relationship between dance, between theatre, between lectures, between libraries. And librarians are a wonderful species of people because they always want to give of their knowledge unconditionally. The exchange is unconditional when you deal with librarians. And that's very unique for an architect. You don't have to think about paying or controlling. It's how open could you make this building? And that comes through, that philosophy of this client comes through in the building, so that you make something that feels democratic, that is open and will be open and is now already open 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days in the year. And there's no kind of, let's say, neurosis about that. It's done with confidence and with generosity. And while we're sitting in this space, so it's a bit dull to be looking at a space that you're sitting in, looking at an image of it, but I'd just like to quote something that Peter said. I was reading some things about you recently, and one of the things that I thought was really interesting is you said, just because we're dreamers doesn't mean that we don't want to be builders. And just because you're builders doesn't mean you can't be dreamers. And I thought that was a really interesting way of describing, as practicing architects, we have to make sure that we live up to the dream, and at the same time we have to also really think about the construction and the skill of making. And our contractor is here, and it was our first time being novated, and we were really nervous because for us, you describe us as two ladies, Peter. I'm not so sure we're so ladylike, but we were really worried. I was really worried that it would feel like a made match, that we were going to be handed over to these people and we were going to be treated well or mistreated, and we didn't know what was going to happen. And it was through the diplomacy and skill of our team, we developed a really good relationship and managed to build a really good building, and we think. But there's also the thing of the discoveries that you make, making the ordinary concrete frame, is the thing of the sound of a building, the thing of how you integrate sound absorption into structure, and how you make a building feel calm and controlled, and this whole thing of wanting to reveal the concrete. And there's nothing in this building that isn't functioning. The T-beams that you see up above, it has these, the slabs have what's called the tab system, so the fabric of the building cools the building. The lights that you see, the sides of the lights are lined with Heraclites, which is sound absorption, because to get the sound, to get the level of absorption that was needed to bring dance and library together was a real challenge, because we all want to expose materials, and we don't want to use the nature of the materials that we have. So and Yvonne was talking about the thing of, it's also our first precast building. Everything is precast, and we were terrified about these 20 millimeter plastic joints, which you spend your life avoiding. And so that whole thing of how you bring the elements together in a way that hides the mastic joints, or at least they're not the first thing that you see, and that there's some kind of elemental quality about the project. I mean, Ger was talking about Greek temples at the same time as we were trying to design a precast concrete building, which we thought was quite aspirational, but it's kind of important in the thing of what is it, what level of pressure can you bring to bear on even the most ordinary elements that you're dealing with. The thing of the socializing importance of university building, how we make the lifts so you don't see them the first thing you see when you come in the door, that you don't immediately go to the lift, that you make a staircase that you really want to use, and it's a staircase where you can meet people, and that we play little games where you come up 2 paces and you can drop off, and then you turn and you pace it so that people don't feel tired. And how do you make a staircase where people will climb 4 floors without realizing it? And I suppose that's also important. And there's also something I find, I see Jason out of the corner of my eye, and when this building opened first, he didn't dance down the stairs, but he did describe being met at the cafe, and he'd just given a class, and it was wet with perspiration and not wearing any shoes, and somebody said, "Are you okay? Are you not? Are you lost? Do you know where you are?" And that's what we thought was lovely about this thing of dancers meeting intellectuals, that you get that mix of things happening. And I'm sure you've danced down the stairs. When Jean asked you to stand up, I was hoping you would do a little something, you know. But it has just been, and then there was the whole discussion with Clarissa about who owns this space? Is it the theatre? Is it the lecture space? And it became very clear that the townhouse was about the students, and it wasn't in the ownership of any department. And I don't mean to kind of go on about that, but there's something amazing about the thinking that goes into a project which sometimes rings true. And here we have the dancers, inhabiting the colonnade, and somehow the life of the building coming through in that kind of framework for life that we've just been talking about. And I think that whole thing of standing back. Sorry, before I go, I want to quote something that Philip Christou wrote to us. The person with Florian Bagel did the Half Moon Theatre, and we were really delighted about this because having been influenced by the Half Moon Theatre, and I suppose maybe describing the ethos of the building. First of all, when the jury was going around, the Stirling Prize jury, it was really the things, I think, I'm not sure, Annalie, if I'm right, but I think the things that struck the jury was that that everything went to the edges, and the simple thing of escaping to the edges meant the middle is free, and that you don't have, we've one fire stairs which goes up a certain number of floors, but we have this awful problem as architects trying to deal with safety and escape and fire stairs which are big with lobbies and they're obstructive and all of those things. The fact that you can escape to the edge and that it makes the center free. And there was also the thing of turning this space inside out, back to front, let's say, so it faces the foyer. And what Philip says in relation to an email, very generous email we got, was that, quote, "The theatre in the centre of the library is much more successful than I had imagined it to be. It is intimate and open, gentle, calm, yet has a palpable sense of publicness and gregariousness, even when it is empty of people." And that was another discussion that was important, was that this space would never be not used, that students could come in and lie on the benches, have their lunch, that there's no control, that there is control, but that, and we noticed that when we've been to visit the building. We were here one Thursday afternoon, I remember, and the building was full of young people, and there was no figure of authority anywhere, and there was no tension, let's say, problems. It's just that they make this building their own. And again, when the Mies jury came around, somebody said, you give the students, not us, but the client, you give the students a sense of dignity, and the students respond to that. And I found that really interesting. And there are small things which the Kingston University does, like the demographic of this university is extremely varied. And you've often described to us the students have to travel very long distances, very often from homes where they've no place to study, and they don't have access to computers, and they can borrow computers, like they borrow a book and give it back, and they can come and they're made to feel welcome. And isn't that amazing to have a university that welcomes everybody and gives a sense of ownership to students, to young people, the people of the future. So I suppose that's much of that has come from the thinking and the discussions with the client. And again, the other thing that's in the air at the moment in architecture is how can you build a building in concrete? What's the future of concrete? Does concrete have a future? And I mean, you know, we've used quite a lot of concrete in the past, and in fact, I can't remember what somebody called us recently, but it wasn't very nice. And the word concrete is kind of toxic in a sense, and rightly so, because we're all rethinking the way we practice. How do we build at a time when resources are rare and important and valuable. But what's interesting about the auditing of this building, because it's lean, because it's precast, because there's no redundancy, because everything is doing a job in terms of the environmental control. It's not about design as decoration. Everything performs a function. That it exceeds the 2030 aspirations or limits, even though it was designed in 2013-14. And that's something that's interesting, because I think in the future of our sense of construction, we have to really analyze how we use materials and how we use stone, how we use brick, how we use concrete, how we use hybrid structures, how we use them for their appropriateness and their sense of economy. And you're here. I mean, what's kind of funny being in a building where we're talking about the building, we haven't done this much before, and we're just finishing with this image because we've started to make models in our office where we make the little people and we make the trees and we make the buses and we make, we don't like those white plastic people that you buy to put in models. And we found that it's really liberating because particularly in Kingston, I love this image here where we're making a big model and all the users are lying flat on the ground and they're going to be put standing around the building. Jason, you might like this. And it's kind of important because it reminds us that architecture is a platform for life and that's what this project is. And somebody said to me, it doesn't photograph well, you don't really understand maybe how the building feels until you visit it. And I think it's because of all that thought and care by the university for the life of the student, and care by us, in this case, architects, for how we put even the most rudimentary structures together in a way which feels refined and crafted. Thank you.
No, that's worse. Okay. I'm sure somebody has a question to ask of this esteemed body of people. Who would like to kick off?
Yeah, I was going to ask a quick question about how you managed to stay so true to the concept, and whether there was any significant value engineering, and how you kind of overcame that, because it's quite unusual, in my experience, for a competition to follow through so purely from those initial ideas. I mean, I think it's fantastic, and that you had all those thoughts and they're here manifest in the building.
It probably looks closer than it is. We got the fastest planning refusal we'd ever got in our lives from, what are they called, the council?
Yes, from the local authority.
The local authority, yeah, because your planning system is different to ours. We went in, there was a discussion and people said no, and that was it. So we had to walk out and recover, and it was really strange. You don't have a... Anyway, let's not go into that. And so we had to make the building smaller. And in fact, we had to turn some things upside down, but we won't tell you what they are. And we had to recover very quickly. So there were some changes made. But I think there's something very interesting when you have a robust competition entry that withstands all the tsunami of, and it is a tsunami of requirements that come at you from all these people. They're very nice, but they're also very demanding from, maintenance and performance and all that kind of stuff. But if a building is strong enough, it's like a person. If it's strong enough, it survives and actually gets better, because you get affected by this process of distillation. And you must feel the same in making buildings.
Yes, I'm interested to know from some of the people who are the client end of that how you felt about sort of sharing a building between different disciplines, or what are normally, many campuses, put one in one box, another in another box, and the twain shall meet. Have you found it unusual or better?
Jason, do you want to go first?
Sure. I think one of the... Sean, in his infinite wisdom, let me meet the RIBA panel, and I opened with the line, putting dance and library in the same place makes no sense, is an act of madness. And I think that was that made it a very unique curry, those kind of things that you think, oh, that's not going to go, vinegar on strawberries, what? And it was just an absolutely beautiful thing to be able to say, this has worked, we're open, and here we are. Down the line, looking at how we can really stretch the legs on this building. And just to go back to your question, the reason we are so close to it is these two, actually. You walk in a room as an end user, but actually these are awesome people, fearsome, and very true to their own principles as well. And I didn't care about architecture at all until I started working on this. And I was over there cheering, spilling my Prosecco when we won the RIBA award, suddenly caring very deeply about this building. And I take people on tours, and I point to the concrete and say, do you know how deep that is? And they look at me and take a step back. And I'm a better person because of the different constituencies of people that made this building, and a better relationship with estates, not so much with the local planning authority, but you can't have everything. But looking more closely at criteria and working with the library as well, and just respecting those spaces. And also, for me, the relationship that dancers have with the library and those spaces, and reimagine that we do use the spaces as well as, upstairs as well, and just for them to be passing through those spaces. But we are here so close to those drawings because of the principles of, we want light passing through the building. Well, that's crazy because we're trying to design a theatre. So let's sit down and talk about it. And it was very nice, but very principled and just gorgeous. And it works, and it shouldn't, and it does. What? So that's why.
It's amazing. It's a fantastic opportunity to sit in a room to hear this conversation. So thank you for the organisers, because normally, architecture is a difficult discipline. And when you say, okay, but I remember your place across the road, which was not the best space in the world, let's say, but you believed in your art, and you believed in it so much, and the university believed in your educational contribution to society enough to put a lot of energy to make this. And isn't it fantastic in these times which are hard, that we can sit as a group and you can say that you think architecture is more interesting than you did maybe 10 years ago. I mean, that's really of value, and to the librarians and to the educationalists. I mean, it's been, when people listen to one another, there's an amazing play by an Irish playwright called Brian Friel called Translations. Mm-hmm. And what's amazing about translations is that it's about the difference in language and about loss of meaning and loss of naming of place and how people misunderstand one another. But in a world that we live in, how we find common ground, how we find sharing is the dream. Shell was quoting Sir Peter Cook about the dreaming, the ability to dream. Like this, it's hard work to get that specification of that smoothness for your dancers to become, angels that fly. But it is an amazing thing. I'd like to comment on the cooperative, the joy of cooperation. I'd like to talk about, when people work together and find a shared ambition. It's a very beautiful.
I think that has been one of the most absolute. I think we would all probably say that. And Peter is absolutely right that in the historical and very traditional conception of universities, they are notoriously territorial, cloistered. They distinctively fight over territories, fight over buildings, and so on. But I think this university has an extraordinarily strong sense of what its values are that Caroline spoke about early on. And I think that fundamentally one of the ways round seeing the way those interactions could happen or not making other departments feel jealous because they weren't in the building was to do with putting the students at the centre and having Yvonne mentioned, or Shelley, I think you mentioned dignity. And I think the sense that students, very large numbers of whom are first generation entrants into HE, who come from backgrounds where they don't have a wealth of privilege or networking behind them, but who are the most fantastically creative people, putting them at the centre actually unlocks quite a lot of those.
Notice you were nodding a great deal as well.
Yes, in fact, I was going to go right back to very early in the project. I've got a really strong memory of one of the first times I probably met Shelley and Yvonne. And I just remember we spent a couple of hours where we literally walked round, as it were, on the table, every detail of the building, and we just talked through how it might function, you know, what it would mean to a student, you know, why were we saying as librarians one thing about a particular space, and sort of backing it up with what we knew about how our students behave. And that was, for me, that was a very special moment, and I think that sort of really went to underpin what then happened over the next however many years, as it were, to actually then realise, you know, what we're sitting in now. And always, you know, within, from the library's perspective, you know, we always have to work with lots of different parts of the university to make things function. You know, you can't have the right information resources if you don't talk to the right academic staff. You won't have a lovely space to work in if you don't have a good relationship with your estates team, or a clean space if you don't talk to the cleaners, or whatever it might be. So collaboration and cooperation is absolutely key, and that was just there every step of the way on this project. I think we've fair to say.
Yeah, it has to be a two-way thing, I think, because you know, clearly you're a sympathetic group of people and you were involved the whole time, but there's so many architects, I think, who are so keen on their diagram and they never inhabit it. I think it's even at the moment slightly unfashionable to discuss inhabiting the diagram. People are able to do marvelous, marvelous diagrams now through the digital means, but when you say what goes on in that space, you tend to blank over. I think a university, you know, it's also, I think, something that you guys said, which was that you've been teachers yourselves. And I find that because as a teacher you get to know lots and lots of different types of people, you do put them into the spaces because you imagine that, you know, designing an academic building is very enjoyable because you put yourself in there as well, and you put all sorts of anecdotes. I found that one designs anecdotally as much as diagrammatic.
Can I say something? You started out talking about the culture of architecture. I have to say we've been inspired by a lot of UK architects, but there we are. And we're teachers, and we collaborate. But we are a collaborative practice. It's not Yvonne and myself, the two unladylike ladies. We are a collaborative practice. We run and we work our office the way that we run a studio in a school of architecture. Jared teaches, Matt and Joanne, who are here, don't teach, but they're fine. But many of the people in our office are teachers. And it's interesting, Peter, the authorship of architecture, I think, is not so honest. Some people are single entities, but the authorship of architecture is shared because it is a collaborative discipline. It's more like filmmaking or something. It's not, of course, there's the direction of architecture, but I think it does affect the way one thinks about the culture of architecture. Is it the person? Is it this, that, or the other person? Or is it this practice? And Grafton Architects as a name didn't come out of nothing either, because we started as a cooperative. We didn't succeed very well financially, especially, you know, initially, but it was the idea of a collaboration of people who were full of passion and, well, maybe more passion than sense. And it's also interesting, I was reminded when Sean talked about it, Sean showed what's our ideas wall, where we and maybe that's when you say that the thing of what we come out of, we're all over the place when we start. We don't know where we are. You know, we take ideas from all kinds of people in our office and from all kinds of sources. And the client from Kingston came and saw that. And when Sean very diplomatically said that we had moved back to Grafton Street, we were in 60 square metres of space, having completed a 50,000 square metre building in Bocconi. And we went back to what Yvonne called our, what did you call it? Our
Lifeboat.
Our lifeboat. Mm-hmm. And we were in these 2 small rooms, and that's only 2000 and, what year is that? 2013. So for all the young, I don't know if there are young architects here. Are there any young? No, they're not. Anyway, okay. It's very interesting, you know, that you go up and down in terms of survival, in terms of scale, in terms of all of that. But what has been really important is us as a group, as Grafton, that we've stuck together and people are with us for more than 20 years. And I think that does affect the work. It affects the work, and it affects the way that you relate to, because everybody here sat through, I don't know how many meetings with, and they think Elizabeth is great. I'm sure you are, and probably know you better than Yvonne and I do. And, you know, there's this whole thing of the way of making a building is absolutely collaborative. The idea comes from somewhere. And that has to be able to survive. Those funny sketches have to be able to survive, and we have to imagine that they will survive. But I think your initial discussion about the culture of architecture is a very interesting one. What is it that energizes the culture of architecture?
I think also the question about the survival of an idea from competition to building also is that the team, when we're doing competitions, that we're looking at the practical things and the educational things, and we're looking at them all together. It's not like it's a pure idea that's very vulnerable. You know, that we take the ordinary and the special together, and the kind of symbolic relationship, say, to the town, to the welcoming of students, or in this case it was movement, how you change, like it. I do think that it's, when things survive, it's because they've been really rigorously thought through by a lot of people. Like in Bocconi, it was interesting, when we were doing during the course of the competition, we had the big Aula Magna, the big hall, in a singular low level in the southwest of it. And then during the course of the competition, we changed it in section and moved it up to the junction between 2 roads. And once it got there, we kind of said, yeah, you know, it's got a kind of a, we do talk about sometimes that buildings have a kind of an anthropomorphic kind of, they become creatures, you know, and they kind of become themselves, and they don't let you push, they become kind of alive somehow. So the process of design, I do think in the team that you're not let go off on a kind of a complete rant down a cul-de-sac. People try to say, no, that won't work, or what about that, and then whatever. So it's like that game of putting over the hands. There is a kind of a, I mean, to support what Shell has just said, that we really value all the input and the skill. I mean, there are things that, you know, in a group that some people are really good at and other people are really terrible at, and, you know, and that it's that collective skill. So I think it survived because it was as thorough a kind of an invention, because each building is an invention. It's like a science of spatial invention by people who are not going to let you away with going down a ridiculous route.
Having heard this love-in between the architects and the faculty, I'd like to hear from a student. I think you're a student.
Hello.
Right?
Yes, I was.
You were a
and
student.
I'm back.
What's your take on this whole thing?
It's so lovely to hear actually what thought has gone into this. I think as a receiving end, it feels like a gift, and when you, like as a dancer in the studio, I need the space to really inspire me. It makes a massive difference where I am. to how I create. And I can say I experienced the last studios for 3 years. Sadly, I graduated, and then this was built. But now, when I create and when I just stand in these studios, ideas and inspiration bounce off the walls. And so dance is, for me, it's a form of architecture, but with my body. And so the architecture is so important. And I think just from the floor to the ceiling to the mirrors to the space in between, all of that makes a difference to how I create and grow in my own craft. So I'm just thankful for it, really thankful.
There's a Spanish architect called Alexander de la Sota, and he says that architects should make as much nothing as possible, which is a beautiful way. What you've just said is like music to our ears. To hear you as a dancer talk about architecture that way is very moving, so thank you for those words, because it's no joke being an architect. So thank you. That's a gift, because you're saying from Peter's question, that it makes a difference to you. So thank you.
Are there any architecture students here from the School of Architecture? There is a School of Architecture, I know. Is there any one of those willing to make a comment? Do you see any signals coming?
Hello. I think I actually got a question. Seems most of you consulted with each other throughout the process and you work together. I guess my question is, through the process of designing the building, at what point did you feel this sense of relief? Was it at some point when you saw that it was getting together, or was it at the end when everything was done? And and throughout the process as well, was there any doubts? And if there was, who did you really talk to? Who did you speak to, or communicate with, to sort of enforce the ideas and the principles that you had throughout the process of the design?
A really interesting question, because Shelley spoke about doubt, and doubt is such an important part of working as an architect, because I think when you think you might know something is when you're in real trouble, because then you are without curiosity and you're without interest in what the other person really wants. And it's wonderful to listen to the librarian speaking, and to Clarissa and Jason speaking about making this building, and you also talking about your experience of being in the building, and Sean also guiding us through this process. Because really, Peter called it a love-in. It might sound like a love-in. And in fact, I think that this project was made with a lot of love, even though it had all of its difficulties. And it was made also with a lot of love by all of us, Matt and Joanne, but also I'm looking at Ian Edwards, the contractor as well. And I suppose that means that if there's support there, then you probably will get to the right place. But I don't think until we've heard people speak about the building themselves that we can actually be really sure that we've hit the right note. And it's only afterwards when we're walking around the building and we're ourselves looking at how people respond to the building that we feel we might have done something that has worked for them. I don't think you know that at the very start. I don't think you know that when you're designing something. I think you're trying to get to a place, but I don't think you actually ever get there until you get to the point where we are maybe now, where we're listening to what people are saying about their experience of being here. And to be honest with you, it could be also not good, because we also make mistakes, and we have to figure out then how to make them right. But I think that because there was such a collective endeavour, I remember the meetings that we would have had. Joanne, Matt will remember them, Shelley, Yvonne will remember them, going into the great detail about everything, but also being guided by the skill and the care and the knowledge that this university has about how the student body are and where they should be.
Sure.
So I don't know if that answers the question, Yvonne. I don't know if you have anything you want to...
No, I think that, no, that's beautifully answered, Ger. I think that you never know, but it is amazing to walk. I think one of the things we didn't talk about tonight was the power of the staircase. When we came here, when everybody was, students arrived in, right, this is the building, grant. They just took over the whole building, like day one, this is ours, grant, no problem. And you want to say, you don't know the pain that we've been through. And what's amazing also is there's one thing which we've learned, which is the thing about sound. I think we've said it to Sean, that the staircase, it's like, when you go to a mountain and you can hear a mountain stream just over the trees and you're drawn towards the sound of the babbling brook, that when go into this building, when it's in full throttle and everybody's studying and all around the edge is really quiet, and as you come towards the staircase, it's like a river of conversation, and the human voice is a very attractive thing, but it doesn't interrupt the study. So, going back to Jason's point, it's completely bonkers that a university wanted a library and dance together. That was crazy. He's right, that was a crazy equation. But then what it meant was that we all had to work together to kind of unravel this thing. But I think it has made, and it's beautiful to hear the comment about dance. And we hope that people who are, with their head stuck in a book or whatever, see this gorgeous dancer. And what was beautiful here, we were here a few times, and what's lovely is to see the kind of awkward person standing in this space, learning to dance. And you talk about the human body. To give people the freedom, I think you're not only giving dancers the freedom, but also people who are up studying other subjects. And they see you being awkward and not awkward. Yeah, I think we need to see that.
That's the openness, because we were a bit nervous about the openness. To be honest. Yeah, so we were nervous about the openness of the building, but that was one of the design principles, and it's one of the most beautiful things. And like any relationship, you think there's things about this that we need to work on. When it does work, it's magic. Going back to your relief point, I'll tell you when it happened for me. Not offended at all. It was when I was inside that room, which is the dance studio behind you, and they've been in use throughout most of the time you've been in here, by the way, I turned the music on to full volume. I turned it to 11, as you do. And the person in the corridor says, put the music on now and I'll see if I can hear it, texting me. And I'm like, it's on. And it meant that she wasn't going to come down the staircase, with a rolling pin and end me, which would never happen. No. But we had a very careful design process that meant it was box in box. This is why I got so nerdy about acoustic delay and how we break up, and it was when we knew it was going to work acoustically. And there's also that sense of shared values being the glue that sticks this place together. In any relationship, you have challenges. It's just your desire to fix them that changes. And if you share values, you're driven by those values, you perform those values. And last Saturday, I was in here teaching people who couldn't sing how to handle their fear, and that wouldn't happen if we hadn't built this space. If we didn't make that empty space, that Peter Brook empty space, where the stuff happened. Just build it and we'll fill it with the magic and stuff. You don't need a clear mandate, you just need values. And we built this place on values, and then we find out what we're going to do with it afterwards. That's crazy, but it's working. And the things I've seen in here are magic. We've launched charities, we've had dance competitions, we're having this event. If this space didn't exist, if those values didn't build this space, if the university didn't say, we're going to do this, we wouldn't have this. And it's what happens after. It starts now. The building's great, but for me, it's about filling it with magic driven by values.
I think I want to finish on the idea of architecture as theatre. It's always something that's intrigued me. And I'm reminded because Kate Goodwin is in from Australia, who I remember put you up in her wonderful exhibition, Sensing Spaces. And you didn't have a solid concrete building there, you just had drapes. But you had a tremendous sense of theatre. You didn't, it was contrivance, but I think that's also underlying how you approach. You talk about the sort of sensible things earlier on, but I think that there has to be another quality that certain buildings of volume, certain buildings of strength, certain buildings of section, back to the section and what the section gives you, is that you also think through theatre. I mean, I enjoyed going to the loo up there.
I hope you went to the bathroom.
Because it has this rather good gallery that you get suddenly sort of theatrical, you know,
lovely, isn't it?
and it opens and then it shuts and it opens. Then you find the loo, which is useful. But you know, so many sort of corridors to the. I mean, I can name some rather famous heroic buildings where you have real unpleasant experiences finding the men's room. And I always say that's a sort of secondary test of a. So I've gone off my point, really. Also, the sort of I'm intrigued by the nookie, these two nooks, which are very unusual.
Well, because
I mean, there's probably a sensible reason for them, but I rather like them because I think all sorts of rather nooky things could go on in those nooks. Again, sense of theatre, or the fact that you open this up and it suddenly becomes, you know, a public room to the public, etc., etc. I'm not going to bang on because it is now 8:45.
So I was really taken with your description of the porous nature of the boundaries between the university and the public spaces. And I was wondering if you could just sum up the impact that the building has had on the public and the surrounding areas and the community, and how, I'm assuming it's positive, and I'd love to hear about how that's working.
Well,
Go for it.
shall I say something?
Please.
As a former Dean of Learning and Teaching and PVC Learning and Teaching here, I retired. I retired a couple of years ago, maybe 3. In fact, just before the building opened. But I'm a local resident. I live 10 minutes walk away up the hill. And when I was getting ready to come tonight, I can see this building. I've lived here for 30 years. I can see this building out of my bedroom window. My natural route from my house into the centre, into the marketplace, the river is via here. This makes, and all of my neighbours and everybody I speak to, this makes a massive difference to people because it's so beautiful, because it gives us a sense of having fantastic routes into what is a lovely bit of the river, and with some disastrous bits that it might have come round on your way to Geneva, but it's just quite an extraordinary building, and the number of people I know who are nothing whatsoever to do with the university, who comment, from small children to people who just wander in for a coffee, is fantastic. So as a local resident, I'm just incredibly grateful for this building.
I think we're going to stop on that wonderful note. Thank you.
Can I say one thing in answer to that question? I know you've just done your applause and don't feel you need to repeat it. I changed my job. That was the impact for me. And I used to teach this wonderful person here, and then I ran the school. But I really wanted to be closer to the community, and this has been the catalyst for that. So I rewrote my job description, and I live and breathe this building now. So I now don't run the school. I'm involved with stuff here. Not all of it, but, you know, we have charity launches and all sorts of things. So it's been seismic, and to be able to reach out to people and say, come and play, is just amazing for us. So that was my, wanted to say that. Sorry.
Thank you.